I'm going to look at deleting the particles so that I don't have to deal with any particles that actually move below the surface plane here. Once they drip, they're really going to move out of sight, and I really don't need to have them penetrating to this point because they actually live for quite a while past the grid. So I'll just jump back in and do a very simple delete based on surface intersection. And if I do a test surface collision, if I look up the collision set of nodes, I'll do a test collision with surface, and the surface I'll use is in my Explorer. I'll look under my environment model. I've got the grassy area, and this is kind of interesting because my pathway and grassy area meet here. So what I'm going to do is actually merge them into a single object. I'll do a create polymesh merge. I'll transfer the materials UVs and vertex colors and weight maps to the new object and delete the original underlying one. Actually, before I do that, in the merge meshes operator, this should work. There's actually a seam between here, but it should still work. It'll be hitting the surface, and no particle will hit this edge right here. So I will just delete the originals, and I'll rename this. We'll call this ground. And I'll pull the ground into my graph and use it to satisfy the test collision. I'll just run a condition that deletes the particles if they hit the surface. So I'll pull in an if, use that as my condition, and if true, let's find a delete particle compound and run that if true. So we'll plug that into a new port on our ice tree. Again, I can sort of add it down a little bit lower here. I'll add it after my delete particle at age limit, or let's say even before that. I'll plug that in just above it. So now we shouldn't even have to deal with this. I can delete that, and we have a much simpler way of killing off our particles that's way more efficient. And it'll be a bit more versatile as well when we pull out our camera. So if I hit play now, at least I won't be dealing with particles that live for too long. The next deal will be to get these particles. I'm actually getting some pretty decent hanging here. The next deal is to coagulate them, and we can do that using an additional force. If I open up the ice tree and I look back under my forces menu, one of the forces is called the coagulate force. We can also use the neighboring particles force, which tends to clump particles together with an attraction field. Either one of these two will work, and we can actually use them in combination with one another. Being a vector force, we pull it in and add it to the add forces compound. So even once the particles are born, they will still have a neighboring particles force applied to them. And if I double click to open up the compound, we can see that particles that are a very close distance to one another have a strong attraction force, while particles that are further away, that force tapers off substantially. And so this is a strength over distance profile. If I minimize my ice tree, I can increase the attraction strength, which isn't really going to matter so much in this case. Just going to lower the cutoff distance here. And it looks like I'm actually going to need to increase the range of the slide compound. So let me select those particles in the ice tree, and in the slide on surface compound, my cutoff distance is, I'm using 5 particles, the size of 0.35. I'm going to have a large cutoff distance again. It looks like I've just been playing around with my particle size a little too much here. 0.12. Again, anytime you deal with the slide effect, the size of the particle needs to be taken into account when working with the minimum particle number and applying that to the cutoff distance. So the cutoff distance would be 5 times 0.12. So we have a value of 0.6. You can usually make it a little bit larger than that, just to make sure that all the particles fall off. But you'll notice with the neighboring particles force that the particles are now falling as a clump for the most part. We can increase the strength so that they do tend to fall together as little clumps. So the effect's actually starting to look pretty good now. The problem that we have is rendering the particles as actual blobs rather than spheres as we see here. So we're getting a nice amount of particles, they clump, and then they fall off.